Well, it's another glorious sunrise. It's the beginning of my 6th day at sea, and conditions aren't really that much different than the last few days. I have a little more wind, maybe somewhere between the 5 to 10 knots. Still very light for the Atlantic, and I am truly in the Atlantic here. We have a nice Atlantic swell rolling through, and I'll just show you that right now. There's the sunrise. And I don't know how clearly you can see that, but there is a swell, very gentle. From peak to peak in the swell must be at least 100 feet. The Mark III wind vane doing a terrific job in these light conditions, steering basically downwind and doing a great job. I'll know together at noon when I take the noontime fix and put it in the log what our distance is, but it'll be over 80 miles. And 80 miles in these light conditions using nothing more than my light weather drifter to propel Wave Rover. It's something really. And speaking of which, there is the drifter right there. Terrific sail. And I have to give Mrs. Wave Rover credit for that. She built this sail almost entirely by herself. In fact, this drifter and the new jib that you saw me repair in the previous, one of the earlier episodes, both of those sails were sewn largely by Mrs. Wave Rover, and I just hand sewed the critical bits in the corners. And even the Yankee that I started out with, that in fact was a sail that came with the boat, but it was part of a roller furling system, and I had to take it off, recut it, resize it, take it from a 150 Genoa down to a 110 Yankee. And I did that largely just with a pair of scissors, a knife, and a needle and thread. And that sail, basically, that Yankee I just described, that you saw me fly after the new jib was destroyed, that Yankee has more or less crossed the ocean twice now. The main, I haven't done anything to the main. I did have a sailmaker put a third reef point on it when I was in the Canaries, and I'm very thankful I did that. It's so useful to have that third reef. But you can see from the drifter how we're still, it's still collapsing, but that has more to do with the swells than the lack of wind. And even though it's collapsing every now and then, more now that I have the camera rolling than when I don't, it's still propelling Wave Rover terrifically. Yes, that's what it looks like, the Atlantic Ocean. Not really what one would expect. Sorry, little fella. Not much room on Wave Rover for you to land. Well, we're looking at probably less than 5 knots of wind. The drifter just keeps on pulling, keeps on drawing Wave Rover forward. We're on a broad reach, Probably only have about 5 knots of wind, as I said, and well, Wave Rover's probably doing 4 knots out of this drifter. Right now, the drifter is probably one of the most valuable possessions on Wave Rover. I just don't know how we'd be able to transit these light winds all the way to Bermuda without such a sail. Well, it's been another day of very, very light winds, and the sun is just setting. And up ahead, I want you to see this. So here's the sun. You're looking at a very, very calm sea. It's really quite a nice sunset, but up ahead, you can just see under the drifter, we're heading into what is a very, very dark cloud. And you can just feel how still the air is. We're definitely heading into most likely lightning and thunder. The wind has been so light, I've changed the sail on the Mark III to compensate for the light winds. I now have my very big light weather sail on, and it seems to be compensating, but I mean, the wind is simply not blowing. We're lucky if we have maybe 5 knots, and with the drifter drawing, we're making maybe 3.5 knots now. It looks like the wind is probably going to even lighten more tomorrow, so I will have to well, there's not much I can do, so I just have to wait this out. It will change, I know that. From experience, the wind will fill in. Well, it's sunrise, May 24th, 2020, and believe it or not, I'm on the North Atlantic. This is really something to see. There's a gentle swell rolling through, but the water is very, very calm. Very calm indeed. The rolling from the swell sometimes collapses the drifter, because the roll oftentimes has more speed to it than in fact Wave Rover is making, or the wind speed that's filling the sail. So we see that collapse when the boat rolls. I had an amazing time last night. About 10 p.m. and it was quite dark, and I had dark clouds up forward, and I heard a noise. It sounded like a mammal of some kind. I couldn't tell what, so I took my bright white light, my big flashlight, and I pointed in the general direction of the noise, and I could see they were little dolphins. And when I shone the light on them, they stayed quite a distance off Wave Rover. I could see that they didn't really like having a big bright white light shone on them. So I turned the light off, and they came up to Wave Rover and they swam around Wave Rover. They must have been a little bit disappointed with the speed we were making. We were barely making 2 knots at the time, but they stayed around us for quite some time. It's amazing. You can see them when they're close to the boat, because the side lights, the navigation lights, port and starboard navigation lights, light up the area well enough you can see the dolphins. and they were the smaller dolphins, not the large white-nosed dolphins that we saw in the Caribbean. Apart from that, it looks like it's going to be another fairly still day. The air is unseasonably calm. The wind is very light, and the reason for that is Tropical Storm Arthur went through here a short while ago, and it's upset the whole dynamics of the wind in the region. It's going to take a while for the normal sort of trade winds and variables to normalize to what they seasonally should be. Well, on that note, why don't we head inside, and I'll flash up my tablet with the Navionics on it, and we'll take a look at where we are and where we're going and what kind of progress we've made so far. Now, right here, this is where Wave Rover is, and we're heading to up here, right to Prince Edward Island. We are 619 miles from the west side of Bermuda. That's just an arbitrary point that I picked to clear Bermuda. It's about 50 miles to the west. Now, I'm not stuck on that, but it gives me a point to steer to. So when I started out, when I left the Caribbean and entered the Atlantic, that was 825 miles. Now we've only ticked down to 690 miles, but we are under incredibly light conditions. And we've been using the drifter to make all of our mileage so far. And where did we start? Well, we started down here. Started down here in Martinique. So I don't know exactly, but we'd be over 400 miles from where we left Martinique to where we are now. Apart from that, just take a quick look around Wave Rover. Everything is shipshape. Now the mangoes. Before I left Martinique, friends from the sailing vessel Maisie Rose and the sailing vessel Fair Wind took me out for a lunch, and they took me to a place called the Mango Tree. And anybody who's been to Martinique, who's been to the port of La Marine, would know the Mango Tree. It's a great restaurant, but of course it was closed due to the pandemic that's sweeping across the planet right now. But they just opened just a couple of days before I left, or a few days before I left Martinique, just for lunches and under quite a different operating model. People had to be quite a distance apart. The mango trees grow more or less in the restaurant, and in Martinique and the Caribbean it's not uncommon to have a restaurant with the seating area outside, but it's mango season and these mangoes are dropping when they get ripe, so they have this canopy set over the eating area, and every now and then one of these mangoes will just fall and hit the canopy and frighten the diners, and then the chef will collect them and put them in a bowl, and they're there for anybody to take. Well, we told the chef that I'd be leaving for Canada and that I'd really like to get some green mangoes to let them ripen en route. And he was very accommodative, and he said no problem. He had a special tool, was able to reach up about 20 feet with this long pole and capture 8 green mangoes for me. And they're getting to the point where they are almost ready. In fact, I think this one at the back side here, you can see it's getting pretty close. We want them to have this yellow look right here, not this green that you see. The other thing is this hammock. This hammock is a great way of keeping fruits and vegetables relatively fresh when underway in hot climates. And you can purchase these hammocks, of course, but if you've been following along on the episodes, you know I'm more inclined to make things. I got this section of blue netting from a man who makes netting for fish farms on the West Coast, and I got this netting over 25 years ago. He gave me a big section of it, and I've used it not just on this boat, but on my original boat when I crossed the Pacific. And you can see I'm using it here. I'm using it for the hammock. I'm using it for storage. I've been using this netting, I've been carrying it with me for over 25 years, for a quarter of a century, because I have so much. But I use it all the time. It's such a handy material to have. Well, on that note, I'll sign off and I'll give an update a little bit later on.